Ni hao, this is Mateo Chang coming to you in the year of our Chang Di 2100. We're still trying to figure out what happened in the United States, why it collapsed so suddenly. And one of the things was that you had a country that was founded on racial segregation. And the United States tried to fix it over time, but most of the programs just didn't work. For example, in the 20th century, they came up with an idea called affirmative action. And that did help quite a few people, including perhaps one of the most intelligent Latina women on the Supreme Court at that time. But overwhelmingly, the program that was meant to help people who were of a particular racial background actually ended up helping, statistically speaking, white women. In other words, the opposite race that it was supposed to help catch up in one sense. So you had a lot of programs where over time there were a lot of good intentions, but again, the efficacy of the programs did not work very well. And people began to become more and more frustrated with the segregation that was supposed to be fixed by the government, and yet was stubbornly still there year after year. But nobody really thought that you had a country that was founded essentially on racial apartheid. It takes a long time to untangle those sorts of legal mechanisms. And people apparently in the West felt like, 100 years was enough, about one generation was enough, and they lost patience. Now, of course, in Asia, the center of the common sense alliance of nations, we never really had that in the first place. We were colonized. And so because we were colonized, we had some segregation that was based on an importation of labor. But the Chinese in, for example, Bangkok integrated and became Thai. You also had in Singapore a deliberate program to remove any sort of racial segregation based on a zip code or based on a residential housing project. So that problem that essentially doomed the United States, despite its good intentions, never quite took off or took root in Asia. So when manufacturing, when all that AI, when all those technological innovations started catching up to the West, you had that stacked on a layer that was, in a sense, virgin territory. And you didn't really have that in the West. In the West, you had both religious and racial segregation that was baked into the soil. And 100 years just wasn't very much time to remove it, and yet that's what people expected in the West. And at the same time, they lost patience. The Asian societies, which had been patient for quite some time, began catching up in other ways. There it is. So what happened in the United States? Did they know what was going on? Did they care? We don't care that much about them, but what we do know is that China has been supporting Palestine and developing nations since 1955, and that allowed a moral foundation that the West never quite was able to recapture.